Welcome to the podcast, Melody and Friends, where I will be taking a virtual tour around the world, interviewing all kinds of wonderful people. And today we land in Knoxville, Tennessee to meet my friend, Lyschel Burket, to talk about Hope has been redefined. Welcome, Lyschel.
Hi, Melody. Thank you for having me.
And I didn't say your last name right. Burket. I'm going to fix it because I know my last name is a name that people mess up all the time. So Lyschel Burket.
Yep.
Yes. Well, how are you today?
I'm doing really well.
I'm so glad that we're going to get to do this today.
Yeah, me too.
Before we dive into your story, Lyschel, I was trying to think where we met. It's been a while. And I remember us going to a sandwich shop.
Yeah, we met at Sills in Texas.
That's right.
Right.
How many?
Yeah.
It's been a couple of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it was before COVID. It was pre-COVID. And so 2019, I think.
Wow. Yeah. And I just remember being fascinated by all that you were doing, working with women. There's something about when you're working with women going through really difficult seasons and you meet another woman that's doing the same thing. You're like, oh.
Yes.
It feels a little bit like a wellspring and you get to talk and collaborate and all the things. So before we dive into what you do and all the things, why don't you just tell our audience a little bit about you, your story growing up, just whatever you want to share.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So, and I'm grateful that I get to tell this story so often. So if others have heard me other places, this might be a repeat, but so my husband and I, his name is Garen. We've been married almost 19 years. We dated for many years before then. So we've been together for about 25 years almost. And let's see, we grew up together. We went to high school, but I think that to tell you a bit of my upbringing, I think is important to my story. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, faith-based home. It wasn't a real solid value system for us. And I grew up in both of my homes that the visual consumption of women was very normal. And what I mean by that is that, that was just really typical in my world to have a biker calendar in the garage and crude jokes and humor and things like that. So as I grew up, while it wasn't my favorite, it was also the people that were supposed to be my people, my caretakers, felt like this arena was really just fine. And so I met my husband. Like I said, we grew up together. We actually went to high school. He was really gross in high school. And I had no intentions of ever being in a relationship with him, but God.
Why was he gross? I have to know. Why was he gross?
He was just this raunchy, long-haired soccer player. And I was like the girl who was striving to get good B's because I'm not an A student. And I was just like so motivated and he was so opposite. So, and he's a bit younger than me. So he was a grade behind me. So he was even a bit like a younger brother. He was just kind of a thing. And then I guess I thought, hey, I need that in my life forever. And I married him.
So obviously at some point he wasn't gross anymore.
Yeah. At some point he cut his hair and decided to get his life together. So,
I love it.
So I said, yeah. So we got married and my betrayal story came out about 18 months into our story or our marriage. We had actually gone to church that Sunday. I actually gave my life to Christ when I was 26 and just before we got married, and we were newly going to church. He grew up in church, but would say he didn't have a relationship with God at that point. And definitely that has grown since he's become an adult. But anyway, so we were at a church service on a Sunday, and at our particular church, a man got up and began to share his testimony, his own story about his struggle with pornography. And we knew him from our community group. And so it was just, so he was in what we call big church, sharing his story. And I was just in awe of his vulnerability and transparency around this topic. And so we get in the car that morning after church, and I was just like, wow, that was so amazing that he was so transparent about that. And then I had that moment I think a lot of women have where like the record player stops, it like screeches. And I was like, wait, like do you struggle with porn? And he was like, no. And I was like, I mean, yeah, I didn't think so. Like, we're good. And I really thought that was the end of it. He did, looking back now, he did get a little bit out of shape that afternoon. I had no clue what the problem was. But eventually that evening, he came back to me and he said, "Hey, I need to tell you something. I do struggle with porn, and I think God is convicting me. And so I'm going to join that guy's group that guy was promoting." And I said, "Awesome. We'll never talk about this again because clearly he's going to a group and they're going to fix him." And that was really
But
where I
how
thought that,
intentional too. I mean, we know the stats
right.
that somebody that
Absolutely.
comes out and says, "Hey baby, I'm struggling with pornography," like very
Yeah.
rare. So I could see how you're like, we're good. We're
Yep. We're
great.
great. Yep. And so he did. He went to the group. He was very faithful to it. I was super thankful that he acknowledged he had a need and he was getting help for it. And then about 4 months later, he went on a work trip and he ended up having a slip while he was on the work trip. He did come home and he confessed, which again, I know is a bit of an anomaly.
Yep.
But I will tell you that at that 4 month mark, when that slip happened, that was when betrayal really set in for me. I think leading up to that point, I was a cheerleader, I was an advocate. I was like, "Awesome, go do this." I didn't ask a lot of questions. I didn't feel like I needed to. I felt
Yeah.
like this was his thing and he was going to get it under control and our world was going to move on. But when the slip happened, that's when it became personal and it
Mm.
became hurtful. Like, wait a minute, when you told me you're doing group back then 4 months ago, that felt to me like a commitment. Like, I'm not choosing to do this anymore. What I didn't understand in that season, obviously, was that my husband was battling an addiction. This was something he had been carrying since he was an adolescent. And so I didn't know that. Right. And so that really did begin this journey of us moving through seasons of slips, but it also began a journey of me trying to figure out a lot of things in our story. I when a lot of times women want to know how I found support, like how did I survive that? How did I make it through? And if I'm honest with you, there weren't a lot of resources out there at the time, probably much like the seasons and years of your story too. And I ended up just finding a safe group of women at church. They were really different women. They were vulnerable, they were real, and I loved being with them. But most of them were not navigating this. Most of them were not navigating porn. They weren't navigating infidelity. It was a lot of other just hard things in life, but it was safe. And I was so thankful for it to just be allowed to be right where I was. I didn't have to show up and put a face on. And that
Yeah.
was a gift. I can't say that was true in every circle of friendships, right? There were some that it wasn't safe to be that way, but this particular small group was really helpful. And so I knew that community was vital for me to be able to move through this. But all along, I would tell you that the Lord had me on my own personal journey about discovering my true identity in Him and what He has to say about me above anything else. And mind you, I'm a really young believer. So all of this is just like paramount. It's so big and I just couldn't even wrap my mind around it. But so we navigated going back to our marriage. Like I said, there were a few slips through those years. But I would say he managed to stay in that sobriety for a good 5 years. And then at the 5 year mark, he had a major relapse. And at this point in our story, we had three little kids. We had a 4 year old, a 3 year old, and a 6 month old. And he came home from work that day and he told me that he got busted looking at work and he was going to lose his job. And so I had made that commitment to stay home with our kids and was prepared, like, that was my life. And so that actually what that ended up doing was it triggered the boundaries that we had. We did manage to have a boundary that if you should ever do this again, this is what's going to happen, which was we were going to separate. And so we ended up separating for a season, for a period of time. And I could tell you, I could sit on here for 2 days and tell you all the things that God did in that time of us in an out-of-home separation for me. But we eventually did come back together. We did an in-home separation for about 4 months and then eventually began to try to heal together and move back into life. And so shortly after that, I really felt the Lord asking me to step out and share my story. And my immediate response was, no, I'm not doing that. So I had a list of reasons why that was a terrible idea. Mostly it was because I didn't think we were fixed. And I felt like the only way he could use me is if I was fixed. And obviously God had other plans. And so with fear and trembling, I ended up approaching my church and I started leading a group for women at our church. And I knew that what God had asked me to do was he asked me to make a safe place for women. That's it. I didn't have to know, I didn't have to have the answers. I didn't have to know how to fix their stories. I just needed to make a safe place for them. And I knew I could do that. I knew I could do that much. And so I did that. I started leading that group pretty consistently. And in the
You
process of
have
that,
to ask your husband
yeah,
first. I mean, did you feel like you had to bring him into that decision?
yeah,
Did you bring him into
yeah,
that decision, or what did
I
that look like?
did. Yeah,
Okay.
no, I did. As the Lord was asking me to do this, I knew that I had to have an okay from my husband. And it wasn't of any kind of like patriarch thing. It was about honoring both of us in the story. And so he was completely comfortable with it and didn't have a problem at all with me leading the group until I said, yeah, you're going to have to tell your parents. Because at this point, our story was pretty much our story. We don't live in the same area as our families. And so we didn't have to share those details with them. But I said to him, look, if I ever talk about this or promote this on my Facebook page, because I'm going to want friends to join me if they're hurting, I don't want your mom to see that. Like, I don't want to dishonor her that way. So that's when things got a little squirrely because he was like, wait, what? And he really just was like, just forget it. Let her find out on Facebook. And I was like, come on. I mean, that just was not kindness. And so he did actually tell his parents. We had a phone call and told his parents before I started the group. So that way they would be in the know. Yeah.
Was it hard,
So
or was it more of a relief afterwards?
it was hard. It was hard. They were as encouraging as they could be.
Yeah.
And yeah. But I think for him, if I'm honest, I think for him it was one of the first times that I think he felt himself being brave.
Well,
Right.
and I will just say, for you to get to experience him doing that, that's a
Yeah.
big moment, opportunity where trust can be rebuilt. It's
Yeah.
those things. Cause like if he said, no, I'm never going to tell my parents ever, that's hard for you. As
Yeah.
y'all are walking along. I mean, we want these milestones where we're coming out from underneath shame and secrecy and isolation and saying it. And I can't think of a more scary place than him going to his parents and
Right.
kind of busting the bubble a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I mean, and
Wow.
mind you, when we shared this information, we were in our late 30s, right? We're not 20
What
somethings at this
years
point.
was that? What do you think?
It would have been probably 20. Well, let me think about my children's 12, 13, twenty
Yeah.
thirteen.
Yeah.
So it was, we were in our late 30s. So it wasn't even like he was still in that, parent child type style of
Right. Yeah.
age. We were adults. We were functioning as adults. And so, but still, I think it was that honoring of mom and dad and things
Yeah.
like that. So, but it was really courageous of him to do that.
Yeah.
So,
I would agree. I would agree.
yeah.
So you start a group at your church.
Yeah. I started a group at our church. And in the process of that, women were all, we were trying to share resources. Women were asking me for resources. I didn't really know where to send them. I had Marsha Means' book.
Ah,
I had one of her books and I had, um, I'm trying to remember who the other author was that I had now. Gosh, I'm so
did you
sad
have
I forgot.
Steffens?
I did not have Barbara Steffen's book yet.
Okay.
The one that she wrote with Marsha Means, but I had one of Marsha Means' books. And so
Okay.
it just so happened that one day I was like, you know what, I'm just going to keep Googling and look for things. And I didn't have the word betrayal in my language. That was not what I thought. I just kept going, Christian wives struggling with husband's porn or porn behaviors or porn addiction. Like I don't even know if I really had the word addiction at that point in our
Yeah. Yes.
story. And so I just kept trying to Google different phrases of my life, what I was trying to find. And I actually came across a woman named Vicky Titi.
Yep.
And I read a blog that was written about her new book. And so I ended up ordering it, and I got her book in the mail, and I started reading it, and I just went, this it was one of the first times I ever felt like this woman was speaking to my soul. Because a lot of the not Marsha's, but other things I had read, a lot of other resources I had, worked through would talk about the pornography or the addiction or what's going on with him. And all of that information was helpful, but I could not figure out what was going on with me. And so I didn't know how to help me heal. I didn't know what to do with me. I just knew me wasn't okay. And that was pretty, consistent cry of my heart, was like, how do I move through this?
Mm.
And so anyway, this particular book really met me in that space. And so I ended up reaching out to Vicky, and I got the gift of being able to be in an online group with her. It was her first online group she had ever done with her book. And I journeyed with that group of women for 6 weeks, did the book. And towards the end of that, Vicky reached out to me and said, "Hey, it's clear that God's asked you to do groups because you're already doing them at your church. Would you want to help co-facilitate some of these online groups?" And I was like, I would love to. And so I stepped in and started learning underneath her, and eventually started leading her groups for her. But consistently, what I kept seeing at the end of those 6 week groups was women saying, "Well, where do I go now?"
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, and she's like, because I'm not healed. Like, I just finally got brave enough to tell my story. I'm not done in 6 weeks. And
Right.
that would just kept weighing so heavy on my soul. And so in 2017, though, the Lord was really clear, and he called me out of a job that I was working and said, "I want you to make this a full-time thing." And so in 2018, we created Hope Redefined as our nonprofit, for specifically to support women through their betrayal healing story.
I
So,
love that. I
and
love
that's how we got to where we are today. So now we're officially 4 years old, and we are loving on women and still creating a safe place for them.
Yeah.
So,
Tell us a little bit more about like what you do within the context of Hope Redefined.
sure. Yeah. So we support women through online groups. We also support them through one-to-one coaching. Each of our coaches are trained through an organization called AppSats. They are trained, and many of them are certified through them. We also have an online community that's completely separate from social media. So it's a private space for them to connect. We have a scholarship fund that we work consistently to create financial support for women, because we know the impact that this can have on a story and on a family's resources. And then we also do an intensive healing retreat that we
Mm.
offer 2 times a year, and we host it outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. It's a 4 day experience that one woman described it as, we are bringing the crippled friend and we're lowering them down through the roof and laying them at the feet of Jesus. And we just let him do the healing that he has for her. So we have women who come to that retreat, and they are in various seasons of their healing journey. It's not necessarily for women who are fresh. We've had women who've been divorced for 20 years, and they come, and it's just been amazing to see what God's going to do, because it's not us, it's him doing whatever it's his agenda. But it's a beautiful experience for women, and I think they really get to reconnect with the one who can heal them.
Yeah.
So,
Well, not only to connect with the one that can heal them, because many times I say this, that when we go through something as devastating as betrayal by the one that is supposed to be safest for us, it begins to make us question everything.
yeah.
It makes us question who God is, who we are, who is safe, all that. So to be able to step into a room where you are known without saying a word, and you feel
Yeah.
seen and you feel heard, now I can begin to re-enter back into the one that created me because of this,
Right.
and that's what I love about this ministry and just the support system involved, is that you don't even have to say anything, and every woman in that room gets you. She
Yes.
knows on some level what you've been through, and you can feel seen and known, and that shame begins to just, dissipate. So
Yeah.
I love that. So is that
Yeah.
quarterly? Is that biannually? What is that?
We do it twice a year. We do it in
Okay.
March and October. And they're actually pretty small retreats. We take a total of 16 women
I love
and we
that.
have a volunteer team. So they're not big. And we actually like it that way. We want it to have a sense of intimacy and ability for women to really feel like they're getting individual ministry time and care. Um, so yeah, but we do it twice a year.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
So for that woman who might, you know, be looking on the online right now, and I know we're Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and but say she's on YouTube right now and she sees this video and it's just hit the fan and
Mhm.
she's absolutely devastated. Probably can't put words yet to what's going on, which we know we all cannot fully articulate what is happening in those. It's just like breathe. What would you tell her in that moment? If somebody stumbles across this, like what would you just say to the woman who's just found out?
Wow.
So many
Um,
things, but
I know. I'm like, hold on, let me go through a Rolodex. What's the one that
right.
it's like you want to cup her face and you want to wipe the tears off her face and say, you're going to be okay. And I know it doesn't look that way right now, but it's coming.
Yeah.
You want to, you want to scream with her. And sometimes you want to scream for her
Yeah.
because she doesn't even have permission at this point, probably to do that.
That's right.
Um, and I guess that's probably the thing that I would say out of my story. We had journeyed that story for the first part of our story for almost 7 years before I got this word. And the word was permission to grieve.
Mm,
And let me tell you about this. Like I could talk all day about grief and how much God has taught me about it, but I could not, there were several things that happened with that grief. The first thing is that looking back over my story, no one told me that I should be grieving.
mm,
But also, I didn't have a community of people who were saying, you lost something. I knew I had lost something, but I didn't have anybody saying that, right? My husband didn't actually die. And I do remember one night laying in bed and I said to my husband, this would have been easier if you died because at least people would have brought me casseroles,
right.
right? Like
Right.
I was like
Yes.
food. But that was the reality of it was I was wrestling. I didn't have the language for it until now, but I didn't have the language to say, I'm hurting and nobody around me knows.
Right.
Right. And so I can give you this real quick story.
Yeah.
Had a woman who was in my group and she, she'd worked really hard. Her and her husband had created some boundaries and she knew that if she ever got a covenant eyes report that looked suspicious, that there was a plan that they were going to implement. And so this one Monday morning, I get a phone call from her and she's like, hey, Lyschel, I just need you to check me. She's like, I got a covenant eyes report. It is not good. This was our plan. Our plan is that he would not come home that day and he would actually spend 3 days out of the home. But I don't know what I'm going to tell our 7-year-old. And I said, yep, I hear that. And she said, but this is what happened. And so this is appropriate for me to implement this boundary, right? And I went, it sounds like it. Like I'm not hearing a lot of gray in there. It's pretty black and white. And she goes, okay, all right. Well, okay, I gotta go because I gotta get into this PTA meeting, but I'll call you later. And I go, okay. And she hangs up. And I know that she went right into that PTA meeting and she showed up like the best PTA member ever, doing what she was called to do in there, right? But I sat in my own car for a few minutes and I started praying for her because I realized I went, Lord, that is our reality.
Yes.
As a betrayed woman, if you slow down for a second, what that woman just said is, I am about to have to implement something I never wanted to do and I hoped would never happen that will not only impact me, but my 7-year-old. And now I don't even get a full 4 minutes to think through what's just happened because I have to still go show up in the world.
Right.
Right. And the truth
And I
is
think the
that
difficult, just to piggyback onto that, what is so hard is that we love our husbands And
Yeah.
we are having to make very hard decisions because of decisions that were made without us.
Yes.
And that is
Yeah.
that's a terrible place to be. Is
Yeah.
like you said, I have to show up at the PTA meeting. I've got to show up at carpool. I got to show up all these places. And at the end of the day, I got to have one of the hardest conversations ever with my partner because he's continuing to make decisions without me that hurt
Right.
me and hurt our kid. And
Yep.
no woman's like, oh yeah, sign me up. I want to have that conversation tonight.
Right.
It's awful. It's brutal.
It is brutal. Yeah. And just even the acknowledgement of the loss that came in
Yeah.
that, just that really short conversation for her. And I think that's one of the things that is a gift when you find safe community to do this healing process with, is because they begin to validate your loss. And here's what I've learned about grief. I really believe that grief and forgiveness are directly tied to one another. Because if you can't actually, and I also think truth, but I could go down that rabbit hole in another day. But if you never know what you've actually lost, you never slow down to say, this is what's been taken or what has been lost because of this journey. It's really hard for you to forgive it because you don't know what you're forgiving. I don't realize, I mean, for example, we had a family photo that is totally ruined for me because that season where he came home and said he'd been acting out at work, we had just had family photos done.
Mhm.
And so that photo hung on my wall for a really long time. And I was like, I hate this photo. But there was so much grief for me about that photo, like knowing what it represented. Right. And I hear a lot of women like connecting to photos. It wasn't until I was able to say, I lost the beauty of that photo, that family photo, that then I was able to move into an element of forgiveness around the photo.
Mm.
Right. So you have to be able to give ourselves permission to sit with the truth of what it is and what is our losses. But we don't get to experience that very often when we're not in community that understands.
Right.
Right. And the other thing I think about grief for me was I also grew up in a family that didn't really, which I'm not really, I haven't met somebody who said that they did. So I didn't grow up in a space that grieved really well.
Mhm.
We didn't see what the point, like I remember losing family members and it was just like it was kind of a one and done. And then it was like, what's the matter? It's not going to change anything anyway. And so
Yeah.
there was a little bit of that for me, like pull up your bootstraps and just keep moving through life because it'll just go away. But the reality is that the person that felt like they died and went away forever was still sleeping in bed next to me.
Mm.
So it was this constant reminder of loss. And I think it's important for us to recognize that and see that as we're trying to heal and consider and process our own stories. So when you say that woman who all of this is just hit, like grieving right now is appropriate.
Yeah. And if there's somebody listening out there that can't really, I think post COVID, we can all get our head around the word grief, but maybe a better word for you is just allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to feel,
Yeah.
because grief has these stages, shock, denial, anger, bargaining, and then we get to this place of acceptance. But it really is allowing ourselves to ebb and flow into all those places and just feel the full range of emotions around what Lyschel said, which is loss, just
Yeah.
loss of things the way they were, and loss of, am I going to be able to trust my husband fully until there is that trust rebuilt, and just so much loss. But really, I think a big step is just allowing yourself and not spiritually shaming you, oh, I can't be angry today. Well, no, it might be that you need to be angry because then that emotion will come and then go. But when we try to shame ourselves and say, oh, I can't be here, or I can't feel that, or I can't do that, it just kind of takes up residence inside of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really good. I think just that grief.
Hmm.
Anything else you want to add? I think one of the things that I heard you say in that, Lyschel, as well, is just you cannot go through this by yourself. You have to have some sense of support. You have to have, I mean, we call it a lifeline, because it
Hmm.
really is that, those people that can love you, can, be here for you. They're going to hold space for you. They're going to be safe for you. So make sure you find community wherever it is. And again,
Hmm.
one of the positives of COVID is that you can find a lot more online
Yeah.
now that you couldn't before. So
Yeah.
there's lots, and I'll put all the links in the show notes so that you can find Hope Redefined. You can find us and other organizations, but make sure that you're walking with some people who get you.
Yeah.
And different strokes for different strokes for different folks. There may be a support group in your area that you don't feel comfortable with because maybe your story isn't out like Lyschel's. So maybe you want to
Yeah.
join her group. It's in a different state and you don't even have to worry about that. Or I think
Yeah.
you said y'all meet online, right?
Yeah. All of our groups
Yeah.
are online. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
find the place that you are going to find your people. Find the space that you can find your people, and that way you'll be
Yeah.
able to walk through this. So,
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you a really quick, funny story about finding people, right? Like, because here's the thing: this women who are listening to this podcast will get this, because at one point I was doing a Bible study. It was not connected necessarily to my betrayal story. I was doing a Bible study, and it was asking you to really consider your own forms of sin and so on and so forth. And it had a list, and one of them was murderous thoughts. And I was like, I've not had murderous thoughts. And then I'm pretty sure I heard the Holy Spirit go, remember that one time? And I was like, oh yeah. Because I remember that one time that I laid in bed and I thought I could put this pillow over his face and this would all be done. And every betrayed woman will laugh with me, not like malicious, but it's that like, we get it. Like
we totally get it. I remember when my kids were little, Lyschel, I remember one night, and I was divorced at the time, and I remember praying for their dad and just, Lord, make him repentant, blah, 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 all the things. And then I was like, Lord, if you'll just let him get hit by a truck, that would be amazing or whatever. So I went from this, like, please help him, blah, 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 to just take him out, because if you take him out, I don't have to hurt anymore. That's all I could see. I was like, so yeah, everyone. So you're like, oh yeah, I think I've broken every commandment in my head.
Yeah. So it was just one of those moments where you're like, oh yeah. And I know that when I share that story with other women, they just like you, we get it. And it's like, there's no condemnation in that. It's this like, yeah, like you understand the depth of pain that I have gone through. And that is what community does for us, like good community. And it was funny. I was talking to a friend today about community, and I said, I think well, especially with our social media experiences, I think that community looks like, I said, it feels like your friend is the person that you're inviting over after you've cleaned your entire home and you're about to share appetizers. And I was like, ain't nobody got time for friends like that when you're living this kind of life. And I said, I need somebody who's my friend that comes over like post-surgery, 4 days, I haven't showered and I smell really bad and the toilets are disgusting. And she comes in and folds my laundry. Like that's the kind of community I need. And I feel that. I see women who are desperate for that kind of connection with each other, that authenticity and realness. And I think in it is healing. I mean, I really think that's how the church is designed that's what God called us to be, is the mess. Yes. So.
Yep. Nobody has time for the other, because there's such little bandwidth after you've been through betrayal anyway, that what seemed so easy, carpool, fixing dinner, what seemed fairly easy before, everything feels like a marathon. Get up out of bed, marathon. Brush your teeth, marathon. Carpool, marathon.
Yeah.
And so it's like and the struggle still is, the enemy wants us to isolate. So really, I would say, if you're just going through this, find the people. I don't care if you write down 1 to 3 names. Who are your safe people? And then begin to ask them, I need you to come alongside me. I need you to go pick up my kids from carpool, because I don't even think I can do that today. And it's a humbling experience to go from being able to do a lot of things to not. But you will heal when you can get that community around you, and when you can get people to begin to help you as you're going through this healing process. And it's a beautiful thing. It really is. So,
yeah.
Well, all right. Well, give us some of the links. I'll put these all in the show, but really, like, how can people get in touch with the show?
Sure. So you can find Hope Redefined. We're on Instagram and Facebook. You can also go to our website. It's hoperedefined.org.
Okay.
We've got a contact form on there, but we also talk a lot about our support services. The other things I didn't mention was like we also support women through full therapeutic disclosure.
Oh, yes.
We have a few webinars that we've got available on there on boundaries. We've also got a relapse plan workshop. And it's something that women oftentimes are needing support with, is not necessarily how to do his relapse plan, but what does she need in the aftermath of a relapse. Yeah. So there's lots of opportunity there. But I would also say that we're a community that loves to be able to refer you well.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a need and you're like, I just don't even know where to go for this, reach out to us. There's a great chance that we have somebody on our resource list that we would love to share with you and encourage you to connect with that person or other organization if they're a better fit for you. So that's how you can.
Yeah. And I guess just to piggyback that, I am not currently doing full disclosures anymore. And so I love that you just said that, Lyschel, because for somebody who might be listening that doesn't even know what a disclosure is where you have somebody who's trauma trained, trauma informed training, who can take both the husband and the wife through a process where he begins to do some work outside of that time together so that he can actually walk through everything that he has done in a safe space. And so if that's something that you need, I'll put that information in as well. But that's going to be something really important. That a disclosure is not something that you do with your spouse by yourselves. And so if you're needing that, this is vitally important for you as well as your spouse, to have somebody that can hold your hands and love you both and support you through this process. So if that's something that you're looking for, I'll put that in as well. And Lyschel and a couple of people on her team do that. And so we'll make sure that we have that access for you guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for being here. We got some time before the podcast to just say that we need to do a lot more talking. You know, we're all in our little silos doing this work, and the more we come out and come up for air and collaborate, it's a beautiful thing. So thanks, Lyschel. I'm sure I'm going to have you on here again, just teaching and imparting your wisdom to so many of the ladies that are in here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This episode has been brought to you by Life Beyond Betrayal. Life Beyond Betrayal is a comprehensive program that provides a community as well as 3 courses for women. The first course is Surviving Trauma Beyond Betrayal. Our second course is called Grieving Beyond Betrayal. And the third course is called Reclaiming You Beyond Betrayal. This is a self-paced program that you can take as long as you want to go through, and also provides a community so you feel like you have the support that you need. So check out Life Beyond Betrayal membership at lifebeyondbetrayal.com.